let's talk about why do some sellers agree to accept installments in the first place. Obviously, folks, when you're asking a seller to take back a mortgage or note on a property, the only way they're going to accept that is if they don't need the cash. And if they don't need the cash, they may agree to it. Now, if you're trying to buy a property from an owner occupant, and you're trying to create some seller financing, and they can't accept installments, or they won't accept installments, and there's no other way you can buy it, then you should switch into the lease option mode. When I get a seller to take back a note, it's because I've asked the sellers the questions that we're going to go through here in a minute, and the seller has agreed that they would consider that. And only then would we got to that point to begin with. So they don't need the cash, or they're not going to owner finance for you. Sometimes there is tax consequences of a seller selling a house and getting paid in cash. It's up to you to point out to them, have you checked with your accountant to see what the tax consequences of this sale would be. If it's their residence, there probably isn't any tax consequences. If it's not their residence, there most likely, assuredly, is strong tax consequences, and they may have not thought that through. They like the monthly income. A lot of people just like the monthly payments. They like the idea that they can sit back and do nothing and get monthly payments. Some elderly folks don't want their children to get the cash to squander. Now, I run across that quite often. Buying a house from an elderly individual, and they feel like if they get the cash, they don't need the cash many times. They feel like they're just going to leave it to their children. They'd rather set up a schedule of monthly payments where their children get their monthly income and they don't have any other choice. Because their children are probably like our children. They get their hands on money and they're going to go through it quickly. And they understand that, so they're setting it up so that they can't get it all in one lump sum. Cash is less important to them than getting the house sold for any number of the following reasons and others. Number one, they're relieved of the underlying debt. In example number 2 a while ago, we talked about taking over an existing debt and giving a seller back payments for their balance of their equity. Not only did they get a monthly income, but they were also relieved of a monthly outgo. So they won on both fronts. The minute the seller sells the house to me and I start making payments to them, they don't have to worry about taxes and insurance anymore. It becomes my problem, not their problem. They are relieved of maintenance responsibilities. They don't have to worry about maintaining this property. And I'm going to tell you, that's a big deal to elderly folks. They don't want to worry about maintenance. To finalize a divorce settlement, they'd rather take payments than have this house stand between them and getting this divorce settlement done and getting rid of each other. They'll do what it takes to get it done. By the way, when you're doing a divorce case and you're dividing the payment, 2 different people are getting it. Here's something you suggest. Say, look, let's create one mortgage on the property, and then we'll create 2 notes. I owe you $50,000. Let's just create 2 $25,000 notes, and then I'll make a payment to each of you, so one of you don't have to get it and pay the other. They like that. Get the house out of their name to avoid pending judgments. People who are getting sued know that soon they're going to get a judgment against them and it will attach to their property. People who are getting sued haven't learned asset protection, or that wouldn't be a problem, would it? They haven't heard Sean. It's so easy to avoid that problem. But they think that if they don't do something quick, they're going to lose whatever they can get out of their house, so they'd rather get rid of it now. So they feel like they're spiting their creditors, which in fact they are. Qualify for a loan on another house. How many times do you think you're going to run across somebody who has got another house about ready to close, or they got one built that they're about ready to move into? They need to get rid of this payment in order to qualify for a payment on a loan that they can't get unless they do. The minute that you create a debt instrument to a seller and say they are collecting X number of dollars per month, that adds to their income column and offsets that debt, and therefore they may qualify for that new loan. Now let's examine that for a moment, by the way. If I'm leasing Carol's house from her and I'm paying her $1,000 a month, and she's going to apply for a loan, how much of that $1,000 will that lender give her credit toward her income? $750. Because he knows there's expenses involved in operating rental property. But on the other hand, if Carol has sold me the house and she has a $1,000 a month payment coming to her, how much credit does she get? $1,000. So it does in fact relieve her of the debt and add to her income column, helping her to qualify for a new loan. Sometimes they would rather take their equity in payments than risk losing it to foreclosure that is pending. It's time to take the solution that I've offered them rather than hope for another solution and maybe wind up with nothing. And sometimes they just want to move to another state. They get the house sold, whatever it takes, it takes. They want to go home to their roots, and getting there is more important than the best deal they can make on the house that they're selling. Folks, if you've never been in the position of a motivated seller, believe me, you can't think like one. How many of you have ever been motivated sellers? A few of you. Okay? You can think like them. If you've never been one, it's hard to think like one. Sometimes the motivation to sell a house far and exceeds common sense. And that's true. I've been there, folks. I'm telling you, I've done some weird things just to get rid of houses. I've sold with zero interest loans. I've sold with nothing down in zero interest loans. I've done all kinds of things just to get rid of the problem. Getting rid of the problem was more important to me than every dime I could squeeze out of the deal. And when you're out here in the real world, turning up real deals with real people, you'll find that that's the case many, many, many times. The problem is more important that they get rid of it than every dime or the best deal they can possibly make on the house. And you'll also find that most of the time, the problem has nothing to do with the house. The problem is right in the seller's mind, or possibly with the occupant in the house. There's no such thing as a problem house. It's usually problem people. Well, there is such a thing as a problem house. Problem sitting on the side of the hill in L.A. It might be a problem house. Actually, more like a problem hill. Yeah. But usually the problem is in the people, not in the house. Target properties for us to look at. Okay. I want properties in the higher price ranges. That means I want them valued at $75,000 and up with no maximum range. The higher the better, and we've talked about that. They should be in good condition, needing very little or no work. I prefer no work. And many times I've asked the seller to do a little bit of work that needs to be done before I buy the house. Located in quality residential areas with no adverse surroundings that would hamper the sale. In other words, if there's a pig farm next door, bad candidate. If it's sitting close to a toxic waste dump, if they're manufacturing paint down the street and the odor consumes the area, not a very good candidate. You don't want any projects. I want you to find houses that don't have any hurdles to overcome, because there's so many out there. There's so many good deals sitting out there. Why work with projects? I want this to be an easy business. I don't want to have to solve people's problems that are too hard for me to solve. If they're not easy for me to solve, I don't want to do it. I like doing things easy. I like shooting fish in a barrel. And I like the barrel to be empty with nothing but fish in it, no water. And then I want to use a bazooka to make sure I don't miss. No projects. If it's too hard, I'd rather not do it, because it just takes away your income producing energy. It can be vacant or occupied if the seller intends to move shortly. Obviously, you can't sell a house if the seller's still in it and intends to stay in it. So if the seller don't want to move, I don't want the deal. I prefer it be vacant when I'm looking at it. But if not, it needs to be vacant shortly thereafter. Why in the world I need to get involved? I don't. Unless, of course, the seller for some reason would like for me to take title to the property now just so they know it's sold. And as long as they're sitting in there, incidentally, if a seller is willing to give you a house for little or no money, and they want to sit in it for a while and make the payments, do you have a problem with that? Like, well, I'll only take it if you move out, you know. If you're going to give me this house, I want it vacant. You might try that, But I'll tell you right now, when somebody's willing to give you a house in good condition in a good area, and they want to live there for a while, make the payments, maybe you shouldn't argue with them. Maybe you should just take it. What do you got to lose? Remember, if you don't have anything to lose, it's hard to lose. Remember that. Put yourself in a position to where you can't lose, or if you do, you lose very small, and you won't have any trouble making these decisions. Because you'll always be asking yourself, well, the worst case scenario is I lose my investment. Since that was nothing, don't look like a big loss to me. Will be owned by individuals, not institutions, usually the current or previous occupants. This is directly opposite of the wholesale business. In a wholesale business or in a retail business, I prefer institutionally owned properties. In this business, I don't want institutionally owned properties. You're not going to create seller financing with institutionally owned properties. And if you do, you don't want it. So stay away from anything that is not owned by individuals. And usually, they live in it or they used to. The equity structure will fall into one of the following categories. All right, number one, the seller will have considerable equity with one or more underlying loans. We talked about that in our example. You're going to find a lot of those. Number two, the house will be free and clear. You're going to find more of those than you imagine. And number three, the very little equity, the seller's main motivation is debt relief. In many cases, the motivation is a small amount of cash, and the seller could care less about the debt because they're ready to abandon the property and the debt.